Good morning, and I'm delighted to be back here in Seoul one more time. General Lee, as always, I must thank you for your most gracious invitation. This is an annual event that serves, I think, a great purpose, and it's to your credit. I've been asked to discuss the question of future economic cooperation with North Korea, specifically steps that the Republic of Korea might plan to undertake, and whether or not these goals would contradict or support elements of U.S. policy to the degree that I understand fully U.S. policy. And I think that the quick answer is that the goals as articulated by President Moon and others paint the potential for very, very sharp contradictions between the broad goals that not only the United States has sought to undertake with respect to the denuclearization of the North, but of course the international community as a whole. The other speakers this morning have already highlighted or the, shall we say, the ambiguities or flat out contradictions between North Korea's conception of denuclearization and that of the outside world, and there's no reason for me to repeat them. But it is rather, as I would see it, as we look at questions related to economic cooperation with the North, and what clearly represents a core North Korean goal, that is to say, sanctions relief. It has been articulated by North Korea, including by Kim Jong-un. We need to examine the reasons why and to see what this does or does not provide the United States and the ROK and others with respect to advancing fundamental long-term goals. We must never lose sight of the reasons why sanctions were introduced in the first place, whether this has been through the UN Security Council process or through unilateral steps taken by sovereign governments, including the ROK, as a function of North Korean behavior. So the record is well known, beginning with 2006 in the aftermath of North Korea's first nuclear test, and this process has continued over time and become much more restrictive in terms of the kinds of procedures and allowed transactions in this process. And it has imposed some real costs on North Korea, even accepting the imperfections with which the sanctions process proceeds. If we look at it simply in an inter-Korean process, let us recall, simply for the record, that the actions taken by the ROK government in the aftermath of the sinking of the Cheonan and of the subsequent murder of a South Korean tourist at Mount Kumgang were directly correlated with, again, things that North Korea did. And North Korea would like us to forget this record or ignore it, but we must never forget it. So why is sanctions relief so crucial to North Korea? It's really quite simple. Unless North Korea is able to achieve meaningful sanctions relief, the results of the imposition of these sanctions over time, even sanctions that are sometimes leaky in their particulars, will make any realization of long-term economic goals for North Korea extraordinarily difficult to advance, unless Kim Jong-un finds ways around these restrictions. Let's just look at some of the available data to date. The most severe restrictions were imposed on North Korea in 2017 in the aftermath of their accelerated nuclear and missile activity. The estimate of the Bank of Korea is that 2017, the North Korean economy shrunk by approximately 3.5%. There are recent estimates coming from a leading professor at Seoul National University that in 2018, the economy may have shrunk an additional 5%. So if you think of it that way, if we do the math, so to speak, over a longer period of time, the logic or the impact, the shrinkage on the North Korean economy would become increasingly severe. This is how applies in particular with reference to China. The Chinese, of course, have a very, very mixed record on the sanctions. There's a lot of activity that goes on in various locations in China that should trouble us deeply and continues to be the focus of major efforts by the United States and others. But it is worth noting that in 2017, North Korean exports to China were $1.7 billion. And in 2018, this is according to official Chinese data, the approximate level of those exports will be about $200 million. So these kinds of shifts over time, if you simply think about it over the longer run, you can see reasons why North Korea would not be on a, shall we say, a very sustainable course. The premise of the coalition strategy to oppose North Korea's nuclear weapons development was, in fact, to impose costs on the North, to sharpen the choices that the leadership of the North would have to face with respect to their long-term strategic goals, not to give them relief in the context of them still pursuing these goals. The multilateral sanctions, to me, have cut at the heart of what the North expects and needs from the international community. So my concern right now would be there is the danger that a new normal is being established in this process. And it is a new normal that, frankly, both President Moon and President Trump seem to endorse. We are aware, and already references have been made to the various kinds of political declarations that North Korea seeking to achieve with respect to the end of the war, peace declaration, military confidence building measures that were just very, very effectively presented. But all of these erode the sense of common purpose that the international community has been demonstrating of late with respect to North Korea. Sanctions relief, therefore, would be an essential component in the weakening of this larger coalition. Now, if South Korea is intent on enabling the North to break through these restrictions with progressively larger goals, let's understand where we will find ourselves in the not-too-distant future. At a minimum, it would give North Korea added political space in the context of inter-Korean relations, and it would differentiate future inter-Korean relations from the ties that North Korea and South Korea have with any outside powers. So there is an imperative need, in my view, for a genuine condition-based strategy. There can be no other way. Blind faith in Kim Jong-un's words are demonstrably unsatisfactory. And as several speakers have already alluded, of late, there have been quite authoritative statements emanating from North Korea that basically define how North Korea sees denuclearization. I would even say, Kim Jong-un has said that this is their firm intention, but if you look at the fine print, and the fine print is very explicit, none of this should lead to an acceptable outcome that either your country or my country should deem appropriate. So President Moon has a larger long-term goal of a transformation, a reformulation of inter-Korean relations. He wants to change the economic facts on the ground in an irreversible fashion. And of course, these are near the top of Kim Jong-un's list as well. Kim Jong-un has no incentive to discourage any of this thinking and debating that goes on in your country and in mine. Both President Moon and President Trump seem to believe that development goals will be at the core of Kim Jong-un's long-term intentions and are critical to his ability to sustain power and to, of course, sustain the weapons program that I think is at the top of his objectives. But pressure means pressure. The goal should not be to make life easier for Kim Jong-un. Those are words that politicians, of course, have difficulty pronouncing, but this should be seen, very frankly, as a source of continued leverage that should continue to be employed. Because in my view, North Korea, over the longer run, is hurting badly. It has invested staggering sums of money in its weapons programs. And this is what I think will make North Korea increasingly vulnerable with time in affecting the lives of its own citizens and in rewarding those key elites that surround Kim Jong-un. Of course, it is counterbalanced by Kim Jong-un's repeated calls still for self-reliance. Self-reliance has always been a kind of a mythology with the North. North Korea has always been very, very skillful in begging, borrowing, and stealing from the international community, all in the name of self-reliance or of juche, which is a somewhat different terminology. So he sees no contradiction here, that he wants more from the South and from others, while he expects to retain unquestioned control over the long-term future of North Korea. So I might term this, to borrow from a movie, we might call this Mission Impossible, unless we make it possible. If Kim Jong-un is to break through on sanctions relief, this gives him, again, the breathing room that he seeks and that he desperately needs, that would enable him to defer or avoid altogether the larger strategic reckoning that the United States and others have long sought with North Korea. His true goals remain undiminished, so far as I can tell. Increased acceptance, or at least toleration, of his weapons programs by outside powers, eroding the alliance bonds between the United States and the Republic of Korea, breaking free from international condemnation and economic isolation that his weapons programs have induced, and advancing his long-term goal, the ultimate objective of the reunification of the Korean Peninsula on North Korean terms. So all of this would enable, I believe, Kim to achieve fundamental goals of acceptance of North Korea as a nuclear weapons state outside of the NPT. Its status, therefore, might be somewhat akin to Pakistan. Now, we are well aware that there are continuing statements from U.S. officials, including Secretary of State Pompeo, that somehow the goal of denuclearization, as we would like to think we define it, be aligned with and not in harmony with any steps in inter-Korean relations, but with Secretary Pompeo clearly emphasizing he does not want to see inter-Korean relations moving ahead and outpacing steps in denuclearization. The danger, of course, is that already we see a separation of these two. There's much more of a trajectory on goals in inter-Korean relations and increased economic cooperation than in anything that gives me any confidence about North Korea's willingness to forego its weapons capabilities. Now, at various times, President Moon has claimed that all of these larger goals, even perhaps ultimately the belief that South Korean companies, the Chaebols and others, can play a major role in the North Korean economy, would be contingent on the denuclearization process. But nonetheless, he proceeds ahead in the absence of those kinds of steps, President Moon clearly hopes for a very different set of relations with North Korea. But this cannot and must not, in my view, enable any legitimation of North Korea's status as a nuclear weapons state, or any weakening of the U.S.-ROK alliance, or any weakening of the larger goal of non-proliferation that is so widely accepted in the international community. Anyhow, thank you for your time. I hope we can have a productive discussion.